Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inlay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Asghari, and today our guest is fellow PPC candidate, Mr. Barry Dewar. How are you doing, Barry?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking. Barry, could you maybe start off by telling us, where are you running, and maybe a little about yourself?
Well, it's a redesigned riding. It includes the South Okanagan, which basically goes from the east side of Scott or Okanagan Lake, Naramata, down to Osoyoos, over to Princeton, and into the west, and over to the east to Castlegar. So it's a very large area, probably one of the biggest ridings, I think, in British Columbia anyways. So the major cities in it are Penticton and Castlegar, with the smaller cities being Princeton, Osoyoos, and Grand Forks. So it's a huge territory. Traditionally, the riding has been the New Democratic Party. It's my desire to be the candidate for the People's Party, mostly because I just think we're going in the wrong direction, and I think God called me to do this, to be honest. And so, like Jonah, I didn't want to turn away and run to away from Nineveh, and all of a sudden find that the ship's getting wrecked. I've been a Conservative member for basically all of my life. I got disenfranchised with the Conservative Party, first with O'Toole, and then with the current leader. And I think there's a lot of I'm not sure exactly the right word, but I think they're not going down the right path, and they do a lot of political grandstanding. I've been and heard Mr. Polyev several times, and every time he gets a great response. But it's not about common sense, and to me, it's about moral decency. And I think they're missing the point. I mean, it does make common sense for some people that to give people free drugs. I mean, it makes sense. That's why that's a law in British Columbia for giving away hard drugs. It is common sense to some people. It's not common sense to me, but it's not morally decent for anybody to have someone stay on drugs is wrong. And I think because the Conservative are using that common sense approach, I feel that they're sort of hurting themselves, because what's common sense to me isn't common sense necessarily to you or to our viewers. I think we have to look at what's the right thing to do, and that's why I have a strong Christian faith, and I believe that we need to get God back into the equation.
All
Sort of
right. Well,
the reason why I'm running.
it was a fantastic intro, and it gave me a lot of questions that I'm going to be asking you throughout the episode related to that.
Sure. Throw them hard and
First,
fast.
will do. I promise to be polite. First of all, Prairie, how's it going? Prairie's a avid viewer of this show. My first question is your riding. What's the sort of makeup of it? Is it rural, suburban, urban?
Well, Penticton's the largest city, and it's probably about 30,000 people. So it's really a rural type environment. I mean, Princeton is basically ranchers and cattlemen and farming. There's a mine there, as well as some lumber, but it's resource based. A lot of ranchers. As you move into the Carameus, Osoyoos, and up the Okanagan Valley, it's mostly wine, grapes, and other soft fruits and apples. And then as you go east, Grand Forks has got some natural resources, a dolomite mine, and a few other things, as well as or is it silica? It might be silica, but there's dolomite along there too. And then as you get into Castlegar, it's back into the wood manufacturing. So it's all resource based.
And is this was this part of your profession growing up? I just noticed the way you describe that. It seems like you this is your core competency.
Well, I mean, I was in the banking business for a long time, so you learn what other people do because you have to understand when they come in to get financing or whatever, that you have to understand what their business is, who their target is, what their market is, those sort of things.
And you can answer this anyway, specific to like Penticton, Princeton, different communities. But
Okay.
what are their top grievances? What's resonates with them the most?
Well, I think we've got a real dislike, I think would be a fair word, for the NDP. I think a lot of people in this riding look at what our last MP did, and he's been in the office for quite a while. I think it's at least 8 years, if not 12. And he had the opportunity to stand up and voice his displeasure for what our Liberal government was doing, and he told the party line. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with politics in Canada is there's too many party whips. And so as a result, you don't get to vote your conscience or your riding. You vote the way that you're told to vote, or else you're out. And and I think that's the biggest distrust right now, which is something that the Conservative Party is really building upon. And I think that we can do the same thing.
Okay, let's drill down a little deeper. I was just in close to you. I was in Kelowna over the weekend, and I hadn't been there in like 15 years. And I saw a lot of there was a lot of drug issues. Is that a problem in your riding as well?
It is in Penticton more so than anywhere else. There's a little bit in the other communities, but like in Osoyoos, there's basically, I mean, there's drugs everywhere, so you can't say there's not. And in small communities, I mean, what was it back in February? The largest fentanyl drug bust was in Enderby, BC, and all the materials and they found, and so it is everywhere. And I mean, Enderby, there's probably not a lot of places, or actually, it was Falkland, which is even smaller than Enderby. It's a very small community, and there was a large manufacturer of drugs. So it's everywhere, and we can't be fooled. But it is an epidemic that we have to control.
In my riding, I'm in West Van, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country. The Sea to Sky and West Van part, drugs not really an issue. There's enough affluence here, mostly to keep it back. But the Sunshine Coast, it's starting to creep in. Am I hearing you that it's sort of the same thing where you are?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have 4 kids. Okay, so if I was to tell you there was no drugs when they were growing up, I'd be lying. I mean, not that they got involved, but that everybody, it's available. Now that marijuana is legal, it's probably a little less, but the hard drugs are a definite problem, and they're throughout the province of British Columbia. I mean, whoever thought this was a great idea to give people free drugs, I just can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure it was someone that lost a child, but at the same time, it just makes no sense. I mean, get them off the drugs, get them to be productive members of society. Don't feed their habit. I mean, it's just, I mean, but drugs are here. I mean, they are there. If there's anybody in the world that says there's no drugs, then they're lying, and you or naive. Maybe that's a better word than lying. There's drugs. Like it's not as bad in the Soyuz as it is in Penticton, because of the size of the community. I mean, we're basically a community of 5,000 people and very little social services. So people that are on drugs generally go to where they can get their checks easy. So in Penticton, for example, there's quite a homelessness problem because the people can camp out there and at the same time go into the local Canada Services office or Service Canada office and get their check, and then they go out and feed their habit again. So it's there, and in Kelowna it's worse just because of the size of the communities. But like Naramata, drugs is not a forefront issue, but I'm quite sure that it's there.
You mentioned homelessness. Same thing in my riding.
Mhm.
I bounce mostly between Whistler and West Vancouver. Both of these communities, 5 years ago, there was no homelessness problem. Now, at the 5 year mark, it kind of just sprung up. Is your riding like mine, or is it more like Vancouver, where it's been there from time immemorial?
Well, there's been homelessness for a long time in Penticton, but it's more prevalent now. I mean, they're a little more aggressive. In Penticton, for example, there's certain areas of the town where you sort of drive by and you go like, "Oh my God," there was two tents there a couple of days ago, and now there's 20 or 30, and down by the mission, I think it's United Church. I'm not sure which church it is, but that does the food bank, and it's quite prevalent in that area. But yeah, I would say 5 years ago is probably a reasonable estimation.
All right, I guess the timeline fits. It sounds like you are more like downtown Vancouver, where they have tent cities, quote unquote, but it hasn't hit my riding yet.
No, we have tent cities in Penticton.
Well, that's sorry to hear that.
Small,
Yeah.
small ones in relation to Vancouver. I mean, but it's the same in Kelowna. I mean, Kelowna had an area just off of Harvey Avenue where it was huge tent cities. I mean, now they've tried to put them into these little small houses and things, and I'm not sure that that's going to be the answer, but it's at least a step in the right direction.
All right, what about healthcare? So in my writing, one of the most important ones is healthcare, and it always comes from mothers, and it always goes like this. I took my child to the hospital. We were there for 7 hours. We got no treatment, so we came back home. Is access to healthcare an issue in your writing?
Definitely. For example, okay, so we moved away and to Kamloops. We kept our house here in Osoyoos, but we went to Kamloops for a few years, which is another place that has a big drug problem, but and a homelessness problem. And when we came back, I owned a hockey team. So when I was on the hockey team, I had a doctor that was the team doctor, and I was working up at the Osoyoos landfill. And I came back, I didn't have a doctor, and he says, guy he pulls in. I didn't realize it was him. But when he was pulling out, he said, "Oh, Barry, is that you?" And I went, "Yeah." And he says, "Boy, you lost a lot of weight." And I said, "Well, I had to because I can't find a doctor." Because when I came back, I asked for a doctor. I've got type 2 diabetes. And I asked for a doctor, and he wouldn't even take his office wouldn't even let me put my name in. And I did say to the receptionist, "Hey, I know the guy. Like we drank beer together, to be honest, and he's a great guy, and so he says, well, come in on Tuesday and you get in. But if I didn't know that connection, I'd still not probably have a doctor today. And there's many of my friends that as doctors retire or move on, and that's a big problem down here. That they lose their healthcare practitioner. One of my best friends just down the street had the same doctor for almost 20 years. The guy's retired and now he has no doctor. And if you go to the hospital, and personally, I haven't. I've been to the hospital for my wife or my another family member. You can be there for hours, and it's crazy. Well, the South Okanagan General Hospital closes on a fairly regular basis, and in Grand Forks, I'm told. Now I don't know this from firsthand experience, but in Grand Forks, there was a time there where the hospital hadn't been open for months, and so yes, healthcare is a huge issue.
I um I used to have a family doctor growing up, and then it's impossible to find one now. So I started going to clinics to get like repeat on my
Right.
prescription. And then I got into so many fights with the doctors there because we have a rule that you can only talk about one issue at a time. My new policy is if I'm not dead, I don't go to the doctor. My health is taking a hit. No,
Oh, I'm glad you're not dead.
yet,
Yeah,
yet.
it's the same everywhere. I mean, like doctor healthcare in British Columbia. Like my daughter is a licensed practical nurse. My daughter-in-law, sorry, she's a licensed practical nurse, and she lost her job over COVID because she doesn't want to get the shot. She got the job back because she took the shot, but at the same time, there are tens of thousands of people, I'm sure, in Canada that are qualified professionals that we won't bring back for silly government regulations.
You mentioned COVID. Here's a hypothetical. Like, you got an alien race that comes by and then they ask you to describe what COVID was. Like what was it to you? Was it government just ran mad with power? Was it a theft of people's money to give it to Pfizer? Like, what do you think it was?
Well, all of the above. Okay, but truly, COVID is just a cold. I mean, if you actually read some of the items that they've given us for years, like on it said COVID on the ingredients, and so COVID's not new. I mean, I heard somebody on the internet say, "Well, it's COVID-19. They've had 18 before." Not that it was the year COVID, but I mean that people were just hoodwinked by the government. And of course, in this area, I mean, we had trucker convoys that stayed on the area. I don't think the truckers did everything right, but they showed what Canada is about, the democracy in action. And so, am I a trucker? No. Do I support the truckers? Yeah. But this, they shouldn't have blocked the borders. Okay, that's all they did wrong, is they shouldn't have blocked the borders. But everything that they stood for is basically, in my opinion, what the People's Party's about. Grassroots, people that want action and not bureaucrats. And we have too many bureaucrats. And COVID, I think, was just people wanting to have control. And they did it.
What about the members in your riding? Like, what's their view? So, in my riding, I would say in the last 3 months, they've started to realize that COVID maybe was a mistake because of the inflation. Like, they're making the connection. What is the opinion of your riding?
Now, my writings are older than yours. Okay, so like the average age is probably in their 60s, so they don't see it that way. They think that COVID and the government lockdowns were necessary because of the threat to their health. Okay, I think many of them are still taking their booster shots. One of my neighbors came by. We usually sit outside on the porch in the beautiful Okanagan and enjoying the sunshine. He walks by walking his dog, and I think he said he had already had 8 shots. Like, I mean, and he feels that that's what's right for him, and I'm not disputing that. That's how he feels. Do I think it's necessary? No, but at the same time, a lot of people in this riding do think that, and a lot of them resent the truckers for it. In our local election, the last time, what is it, 3 years ago, the fellow that ran for mayor had supported the truckers financially, and because of that, I think he lost. And I think now people are now waking up to the fact that there's a lot of spike protein in them that is not a good thing, and I think people are now questioning the government. See, I guess you asked a question earlier about why am I in this? It's because we don't ask the right questions, and the government just force things on us. And we have to ask the right questions in order to get the right answers. If you just go along with the narrative that somebody's giving you, then you're just going to be led down the garden path. And I don't think it's any different today with the three main parties. Like the thing that Maxime Bernier brings to the table is ability to sort of see outside the box and make sure that things are square. And I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but one of the things that Max has been saying for a long time is Canada first, and now the Conservative Party have picked up on that. So they're just grandstanding and trying to get on the bandwagon of a populist movement that really has the right idea. Okay, because if we put Canada first, then we can do more in the world. Like, there's a lot of people that say, well, if the PPC ever formed government, they would cut off all outside financing, they'd stop immigration, they'd do all these things. That's not true. That's not what Max is saying. He's saying it has to be done in a smart, controlled environment. And I think that's the only way to go. Immigration is a problem. You talked about healthcare. Why don't we have doctors? Why don't we have housing? Why don't we have these things? Because we let in millions of people and there's nowhere for them to go. They don't have they don't have that opportunity. And the big thing for me is the seniors here lose out because most seniors don't have the resources to be able to go somewhere else and do something better. I think I'm not making sense there, but like, if you look at the People's Party's platform and you go to PPC, the People's Party of Canada website, you'll see that all of their policies make sense. And that's what drew me to Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada. They're thinking outside the box. They're trying to get people excited about their country again, instead of just, well, it's okay, like laissez-faire type of thing.
Sorry if you can hear me frantically clicking. I was going to bring the policies up. Um, Immigration, like, how do you broach that subject with your constituents? Um, I always size the person up based on whether they're immigrants or whether they're not immigrants, and I pitch it differently.
Well, and obviously, there's a lot of immigrants in this area. Basically, I would say that almost all the agricultural people are from other countries originally, or not maybe them directly. Maybe it's their fathers or mothers, but a lot of East Indians. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be here, and I don't think anybody does. But they came here to this country, and they're doing a job. They've assimilated themselves into the community. They're Canadians. I mean, they may have a different color skin or whatever, but they're Canadians, and they think like that. The problem I have with a lot of immigrants is they don't think that way. They think like, I'm from Ghana and I want to bring my culture with me. Well, why did you come? I guess is the question. And that sounds a little hard, but at the same time is, don't try to bring your country to our country. We are Canada first. And as long as you embrace that, you're welcome. And we've always been that way. I mean, we are immigrants. We're all immigrants. My family was an immigrant at one point in time. I have a daughter, a son-in-law that's from South Africa. I have a daughter-in-law that's from Jamaica. And so, like, they're immigrants, but they're Canadians. But technically, they're immigrants. And that's what the difference is, or in my opinion, we need to have everybody being a Canadian and wanting what's best for Canada. And if that means that some immigration has to be curtailed, then that's what needs to be done. Until we get the housing crisis sorry, under control, and the doctor situation, I mean, schooling, all those things are all tied to the number of people that there is. I mean, if you've got 50 kids in a classroom, nobody's learning anything. So, and that's what we've been doing, is we just force things on people. Same with the healthcare. If 60% of Canada can't find a doctor, which it seems, I think that, I don't know if that's an exact statistic, but if large numbers can't find a doctor, why is that? Well, it's partly because we've brought in too many people, and once we get that controlled, we can bring in more. But we need to get that under control. And I'm not saying no immigrants. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think Max is saying that either. I think what he's saying is it has to be responsible, controlled growth.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of incompetent governance, which is increasing bureaucracy, and too much demand, which is immigration. So they're burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at the tariffs that are coming in, I mean, a lot of that is Trump saying that we brought in too many immigrants. I mean, the United States can't really can't really complain about our immigration compared to theirs, but at the same time, it's not a matter of numbers. I mean, in Canada, we open the door too wide. Okay, and like I say, we should have immigrants. We should have immigration. We should have all those things. We're not saying that that's the wrong thing. What we're saying is it has to be well thought out and well controlled. That you're making them come in to have a better life than where they are coming from. Like, one of the things one of my pet peeves is this Bill 293. I have a problem with the Conservative government over it. Why didn't they do something about it? They say, well, we weren't the majority government, and so we couldn't do anything. Why did they not say something when Bill 293 was going before the legislature 2 years ago? Now it's before the Senate and probably will be passed into law as we speak. But the thing is, with Bill 293, it's 700 pages long. I don't think anybody read it. When the National Coalition, Canadian Coalition, read the document, and they found that part of it, I mean, it's a common sense bill. The bill is basically says emergency or pandemic preparedness. It makes sense. It's common sense to have a plan for another pandemic. Okay, but in the pages it says, well, let's eat crickets. Like, that's the protein of choice. What about the farmers? What about the guy? Sorry, I have to adjust myself a little bit. I'm getting excited. But the farmers that have cows, are they going to cull all the herds? I mean, they're culling the chickens right now. So what's next? And so I think Bill 293 is a huge thing. And now, of course, the conservatives are jumping on that bandwagon. But where were you 2 years ago? Why didn't you do something about this? Why didn't you stand? Why didn't Pierre Poilievre stand up in the House of Commons and say, "Hey, who wants their crickets fried and who wants their crickets boiled? I'm bringing in crickets for everybody for dinner." I can't see the 300 members of the House of Commons saying, "Oh, I would like mine fricasseed and I'd like mine this way." Nobody wants to eat crickets. I mean, we do have them in our food, and I understand that, which I think is another problem that we have, is there's too many times they put a fancy word to say what a cricket is. But like I said, I'm getting excited and I'm sorry for that. But like crickets are a huge deal. And for farmers, they don't even know about it. I talked to a farmer, a cattle rancher actually, and I said, "Well, what do you think about Bill 293?" And he says, "What's that?" So I explained to him that, it's the Emergency Preparedness Act. And he says, "Well, that makes sense." And I said, it does. But they buried in that legislation about probably culling your cattle herd. And he goes, "Well, no, it's not." And I said, "Of course, they're going to say first it's avian flu, which, I mean, if avian flu was really as bad as it is, in my opinion, birds would be falling out of the sky." Okay. So, I mean, I understand that the Canadian, what do they call it, Food Inspection Agency has a job to do, but I think they've gone overboard. I'm sure you heard about the lady in Edgewood. Now, she's not in my riding. I wish she was, but they were going to cull 400 ostriches, and she's a bit of an experimental farm, raising these ostriches. She had 2 PCR tests that said there was avian flu in the herd, 2 out of 400. So think about that. The number is so minuscule. And she said, "Well, if we separate those and we work to have a immunity system," I mean, talk about COVID and the whole herd mentality. I mean, there's a chance for actually to find out with this 400 birds, because they're in the middle of nowhere, that to actually get the science, if you want to call it that, or at least the information to be able to help other farmers. But instead, they're going to kill them all. Now they got a reprieve on Saturday, I think it was, but at the same time, it's stupid how the government is making things so that they can control us in the next pandemic. And we're going to have one, but it'll be maybe a financial one. I'm actually worried that when the Liberals get back into power, they're going to call an Emergency Measures Act again and delay Parliament and delay an election. I hope it doesn't happen. I think the Canadian people deserve to have their voices heard, but I wouldn't be surprised if they all of a sudden said, "Well, it's an emergency. We passed the whatever we call it now, Emergency Measures Act, and what do we call it? Prorogue, close Parliament for a longer period of time." And I can see it happening, and because and there's so many different things. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. The the question you asked was, "What do I think about COVID?" And I'm nowhere near that anymore, but I think it's coming again.
I'll give you another loaded question. The problem you mentioned, you criticized the Conservative Party. Uh, our leader Max always says that they are intellectually and morally bankrupt, and I'm starting to more and more agree with that. So they don't stand on principle; they look to polling. And whenever we're out there, the People's Party, we stand on principle. We're doing the hard work to educate the public, and every time the 51% they come finally to our side, the Conservative Party just comes in and usurps us. And I'm getting really, really frustrated and pissed off. And I'm going around, I'm telling Canadians, I'm like, do you really want to put your faith in a party that doesn't stand for anything? It's just an empty vessel. So it's not really a question. What are your thoughts?
Well, okay, so I have problems with the Conservative Party that are massive. Okay, one, I've already talked about Bill C-293. I mean, we built with our money, yours, mine, everybody listening to this project, we built the largest cricket manufacturing plant in the world in London, Ontario. Why was the Conservative Party not saying something about crickets back then? Why didn't they say, "Hey, Let's not
Would
build this stupid,
would you
spend
would you say
millions
they
of
were
dollars.
crickets? Would you say there were crickets on the issue? That was a
Crickets is
joke.
part of it. Yeah.
Crickets. I was joking.
Well, you know what
There
I'm
were
talking about,
crickets.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Huh? I'm
I was
sorry, I missed what you
joking.
said there.
I was making a joke
Okay.
about how there were crickets on the issue.
Well, there is crickets on the issue.
Uh,
It's a huge issue. I mean, I don't want to eat crickets. I had a friend that sent me a message on Facebook and he says, well, they taste like popcorn. I'll have crickets. And I said, okay, well, I'll go to Ruth Chris and I'll have a steak and you can have crickets. And we'll see who enjoys themselves more. But, because it's a little flippant. But the other thing that the conservatives really, really bothered me. Well, sort of the same issue, but two ways. Okay, I'm not a national socialist, okay, or a Nazi, as we like to popularly call them, but we had a lady come from Germany. The conservative leader said some of his members went and had dinner with her. He lambasted them for going and talking or having dinner with her, and they had to apologize. Okay, so because she apparently was a Nazi. Okay, maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. I don't know. But we had a real live Nazi come onto the House of Commons floor, and it says on the news. Now I wasn't there, so I could be wrong, but it said on the news that all the members of Parliament stood and cheered for the guy. So if all of them did, that means that Mr. Polyev did. That every single one of those conservative members stood and clapped for the guy and cheered for him. And he was a real life Nazi in the Second World War. So why now it's a big deal about well, I shouldn't say a big deal, but then Polyev comes out and says, well, you know, why did they let him on the floor? Well, my question is, if you're the leader of the House of the opposition, shouldn't you know who's coming on the floor? I'm pretty sure that you or I could not walk onto the House of Commons floor today without being totally vetted by every what are they called? CSIS representative. There's nobody going to get in there, and they'll be telling the other guys. So if Polyev didn't know, then shame on him. He should have known that this guy was a I can't say he was a war criminal, but he definitely was killing our people. He's a Ukrainian that was shooting against the Canadians and Americans and the Russians and all the Allied forces. He was shooting against us. Okay, now maybe he was just doing what he was told, but it's still why acknowledge someone like that, cheer for him, and then try and say, well, he's a Nazi. Well, no, you shouldn't let him on the House of Commons floor in the first place. You nor I could get there. And that's the point is we, I think in that one instance, showed how, I'm going to probably use the word wrong here, how morally bankrupt the Conservative Party was. They allowed this guy to come in there. And then if you didn't know, well, you should know. Just my
uh,
rant.
David of the Freedom Conversation podcast. He says the gentleman Hunka, he was worse than a Nazi. He was an SS volunteer. That I have to agree with that. That's you're not even drafted. You're volunteering for the most vicious branch of the Nazi army.
Yeah, well, and I didn't know that, and that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I
anyways,
agree with you.
sorry, I
So
get carried
no,
away.
it's okay. I'm going to pick up on another thing you mentioned there. The woman's name was Christina
Christina
Anderson.
Eric
Yeah,
Anderson, yeah, Anderson.
yeah. So what
Okay.
happened there is um, Pierre Poilievre, he blinked. You know, he saw that the media was going to come after them and call them Nazis, and he said, rather than standing up for my candidate, my MP, that it wasn't Pierre Poilievre that invited her to dinner. It was one of his MPs. I think it was in Oshawa. And he said, you know
Yes.
what? Just throw this woman under the bus, or you're out of the party. I don't want to deal with this headache. And that, to me, that's not really leadership. Like there comes a point where you want to avoid the mainstream media, but if he's afraid of them now, I don't buy this whole let's just keep our mouths shut until we're in and then we'll be magically conservative argument.
I agree wholeheartedly. Well said.
Yeah, so that's one of my concerns with the Conservative Party. All right, so that was on immigration. what about education? That's another issue that's big in my writing. And again, it's usually like this. It's a mom. It's talking to me in private. You know, she looks left, looks right, lowers her voice like, "Hey man, my son's teacher is transgendered. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel about that." Is that in your community as well?
Yes, my granddaughter, her, I don't know that they're transgender, but they have different sexual orientation than what I think most people in consider to be mainstream. And so, and they do say things. And my granddaughter has sat on the couch with me, and when she was in grade 1 and 2, and asked me what does this mean. And so I don't think transgenderism is a big deal in the interior as much as it is for you, but I know it's a concern.
All right. And then on those three issues, healthcare, immigration, and education, maybe,
Mhm.
how much of a role does your faith play? Because you mentioned that faith had a big role in you running. Does it cut across, or do you keep the two separate?
No, it's all one and the same. I mean, uh, um, I guess this is going to sound corny, but it's the truth. Um, you have to love the person, but you can hate the sin. Now, if you want to get into is transgenderism a sin? Mutilating anybody's body is definitely questionable. I remember, you're probably too young, but well, maybe not, because I think they have reruns. But there was a show called MASH. Okay, and MASH, Corporal Klinger would go and try dress up as a woman and try to get himself out of the army by being um, a woman. Okay, well, everybody, I mean, it was sort of funny. And I mean, I guess this is where transgenderism sort of started. It was funny, it was comical, but the guy was trying to get out of the army and doing everything he could to say he had a mental disorder. Now we said, well, that's not a mental disorder. That's a, not sure what we call it anymore, but it's a mental disorder is what it is. And I mean, and there has to be a way to help them. I mean, if you want as an adult to change your body and do those things, I guess it's your right. I don't agree with it, and I'll love you regardless. But at the same time, I won't don't have to accept it. And just because you think it's the right thing for you, that's not the right thing for everyone. And I've heard of cases in the lower mainland where children are being, for lack of a better word, mutilated at a very young age to foster this agenda. And that some of it's by their parents. I mean, or with their parents' concern, but some of it's without. And that's the scary part is the state wants to run everything. I mean, in the Christian faith, and I think in all faiths, I think if it's East Indian or any faith, everything comes back to family. And if you don't have that strong family support, I think you do sort of wander off path. And and in my Christian faith, I believe that God has a plan for all of us, and that plan, it doesn't include anything that He hasn't already made. I mean, He made you as a man or as a woman, and that's what you're supposed to be. Maybe it's difficult at times to cross that bridge, because of the weird things that we get online, the crazy ideas that come through the airwaves. I mean, when I grew up, we had no internet. Our advancement in technology was the telephone. I mean, like now I can talk to you, and you're in Whistler or wherever you're at, and and we're having a conversation. And so there's way too much information out there, and I think it really has created a problem, and now we have to fix it. And I think that's part of what this next election is going to be about, is fixing some of these problems, or not all of them necessarily in this one term. And don't get me wrong, I don't think the People's Party of Canada is going to form the government this election, but we have to take a step in the right direction. And I think I'm that guy to do that. Is we can make it happen that we get 1, 2, 3 candidate or people in power in the House of Commons, then we'll get more the next time and more the next time, because this is the right movement. And it's not so right wing. It I hate to use the phrase, but it just makes sense. It makes sense to do what's right for everybody. And I think that's what my Lord and Savior wanted. I think he wants me to bring that message to people and to help them get their life in order. I mean, drugs. Why are people taking drugs? Well, because they have mental disorder. Why are people doing transgender? They have mental disorder. Like it's we have to fix the problem. Ask the right question. How do we help these people? Not let's just do what they want. Anyways, sorry. I get
No,
carried
no.
away.
This is your episode, and that was I really agreed with what you said. We need, what did you say? It makes sense. Like a lot of these things, it just makes sense with the PPC. We have to get a couple candidates in on the issue of drugs.
Mhm.
You mentioned previously, if you're a grown adult, you should be able to do whatever you want with your body. Where do you draw the line with drugs? I've been struggling with this as well.
Where do you draw the? Well, I mean, I have a relative who owns a cannabis shop, so I probably can't say too much. I do think there's differences between like cannabis and the rest of the drugs, and I mean, I love beer. Okay, that's a drug. Okay, and I love it. Okay, I'll sit there and have a beer with my son regularly, but at the same time, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not going out and saying you have to drink drugs or drink beer. It's what I enjoy doing. I don't get stupid drunk, um, but some people do because of again mental disorders. They don't know when to stop, and it's the same with drugs. Is they don't know when to stop. I'm going to have if I'm smoking weed, then I do whatever the next level is. I'm not sure what it is anymore, but say it's meth or something that's laced with fentanyl or put fentanyl in the marijuana. That it's just a step. And why are they doing those steps? You see, because one of the things you said earlier on is in your riding, you're more affluent, so you don't see the drugs, but it's there. Okay, I'm in Kamloops, and I owned a hockey team, so we're in Kamloops and a large city, and I never really thought much about. I saw the homeless people, but there was my coach, who's a great guy, just a wonderful human being. His name's Ed Patterson. Ed went to a party with some people. Ed is as straight laced. He played in the NHL. He's as straight laced as you can be. And he went to a party, just a social party with some of our hockey team supporters. And somebody offered him cocaine, and he went like, oh, "My God, what's this doing here?" Almost everybody at that party, and there was bankers and one guy was like a wealth management guy. They were all doing cocaine, and Ed was just totally shocked. Okay, now I wasn't there because I don't know why I wasn't there, but anyhow, Ed went in my place, and he actually was shocked at how much white collar people were there doing cocaine. Now I don't know if cocaine is the next step beyond marijuana or if it's fentanyl or whatever. I don't know any of that. I don't know the drug business. I don't understand why anybody would want to do that. I don't want to lose control. I like when I have beer, I stop. Okay, I don't want to get to the point where I'm falling down drunk. Well, I don't think you have that control with drugs. And so I think in your writing, I think drugs are there. It's just that they hide it better. I had a friend that, as a teacher at Thompson Rivers University, he died of an overdose because somebody had laced a marijuana cigarette with fentanyl. Okay, you don't know what you're getting. And I mean, I could go on about the number of people I know that have had similar situations. A lawyer friend of mine, his son overdosed on fentanyl. Why? Because he was just at a party and didn't know when to stop. It's sad, but I don't think anybody. I mean, it was his fault. I mean, he shouldn't have done it. But at the same time, how do you stop it? You've got to have communication. You have to have people asking the right questions of that person before they get that far.
I'm
That
laughing
makes
at
sense.
one of the. It does. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, but one of the comments, one more godless woman, weed smokers are weed smokers and generally don't have a next step. So she appears to be more pro marijuana. I'll let you respond to that in a moment. But Let me ask the question in a different way. Uh, should we, in your opinion, should we decriminalize drugs like with marijuana? Should we fully criminalize it, or is it something in the middle where it's tolerated but it's not endorsed? So if you do it behind closed doors, we won't come after you, but don't you ever dare put it in the schools and in public.
Well, I think that's a policy that you could probably never enforce. So I think it does have to be more cut and dried than that. Um, do I think that? I mean, there's so many different drugs. Like I said, alcohol is a drug. Okay, but we restrict that to people of 19 and over. Marijuana is a drug. We restrict that to 19 over, but we don't restrict the other drugs. We don't. I'm not saying that restriction is just the only answer, but there's got to be a start somewhere. And so, to really not answer your question is, I think drugs are a huge problem that needs a solid answer. And of course, in my faith is you have to turn to Jesus and make sure you are walking the right line. And and I think that comes with responsibility. We all have to be accountable and responsible. And drugs are no different than anything else in life. We don't drive down the street at 200 miles an hour. Why don't we? I mean, you actually are allowed to because you just pay a fine, or maybe they'll take your license, but it's not. It's allowed if you're willing to pay the tax.
Interesting view.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I guess we're getting to the end of the show, so I'm just going to ask one last
Sure.
question. I wanted to touch on your faith. Let's go with MAID. Like, what's your view on medical assistance in death?
Okay. Well, I was raised as a Catholic, so the actual answer from the Catholic Church was killing yourself is a mortal sin. So if you believe in mortal, then that means you're going to hell. Um, so if you believe in the afterlife, MAID is just another fancy way for the government to say um, uh, it's okay to kill yourself. Well, it's not okay to kill yourself. My brother-in-law actually is living with us right now, and he is palliative, and which means that he's probably in his last days. And actually, yesterday I talked to him, and I said, what do you want, John? If he's starving himself to death, and I said, if that's what you want, I mean, that's your right. But he didn't talk about MAID. He didn't think of, I mean, I know he knows about MAID. He's a smart guy. He knows that it's wrong, and he's at the end of his life, and he knows that. And I had another friend whose dad decided sometime previously to commit him to do MAID at a certain date. I phoned him, like I hadn't seen him in a long time. I phoned him up, and he lives in Kelowna. And I said, Doug, how you doing? And he recognized me right away. We were not close friends, like the dad and I was friends with his sons, but not with him. Okay, but he knew it was me right away. Now, whether that was call display or some one of his kids saying, "Hey, Dad, it's Barry Dewar," that's phoning. I don't know that part, but he decided that he was committing suicide on a certain day, and he actually was really upset because the doctor he'd scheduled this with like a year before went, why he wanted to do it on the day his anniversary with his wife. His wife passed previously, and he wanted to have commit MAID on the day of that, and he was upset because they couldn't do it that day. They did it a day later. Okay, so he had mental cognitive ability. He knew who I was, somebody that we were acquaintances, not friends, and he knew all this stuff. So my question to his son will be, because I haven't seen him since it happened, is why did he do it? Why did he decide that at that point in his life that he needed to do that? And I know he was raised in the Catholic Church, so I'm quite sure that he knew how wrong it was. So MAID, totally against it. Government sponsored death, nah, scrap it.
I
Sorry.
say the way that we're going down this path where they're expanding the application of MAID, it's going to get to a point where if you have a bad hangover, you'll just be like, all right, I'm just going to kill myself. The aspirin's not working. So it's getting out of control.
Now, I've heard stories. There's a lady that goes to our church who moved up here during COVID, and her husband came ahead of her, and he got COVID quite badly, and he was hospitalized. And she was traveling behind him like a day or two later, wrapping up the house and coming up to the Okanagan. And by the time she got here, her husband had signed the papers for maid and was dead before she arrived here, which was like 3 days after he moved up. So like it was just like, oh well, you're sick. Here, sign this, and away he went. She had no knowledge at all. So I mean, even if it was a good idea, because he was in so much pain, well, at least talk to the family. Which is getting back to transgenderism. Talk to the family. If it's all about the family, if you look at what any religion is, particularly the Christian religion, it is about family. And you mentioned before we started, what's the first line in our Constitution? Or not Constitution, sorry, in our charter? The supremacy of God. God has been removed from the situation. He's not in the schools. He's not in the businesses. My dad told me never talk religion and politics. And I'm talking both right now because that's what the problem is. We need to get God back into our lives. And that doesn't matter if I believe Christian God is the only one. But at least if you believe in what your God is telling you, whether that's East Indian or any other religion, they all focus on the same thing: goodness in people. And that's what we've lost. We've lost goodness.
So Barry, any final words in wrapping up this episode?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think wherever you're listening to this, vote for the People's Party of Canada. I think Max Bernier is the right guy to have some say. I think they're trying to keep him out of the debate if we have an election or when we have an election. And I think that's wrong. Everybody should have the ability to hear anybody. If you want to donate to the People's Party of Canada, you can donate to my website, which is People's Party, ppc-ok.com, and help to get people elected. I think my background in hockey is a real strong part in this area. I know a lot of people, and I think I can be the candidate that can actually get one of the first seats for the People's Party. That's what I believe.
Wonderful, Barry. I look forward to good things from you. You're a solid candidate and a good member of the community. So best of luck. And as we get closer to the election, we'll get you back on.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, and you have a great day.
You as well. Bye. Goodbye, everyone.